Hey guys, introspection here, and as you can see, I'm trying out a new setup. And hey, look, I even have a new co-host. Say hi, Uku. 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 Okay, so sometimes she just likes to float there. But, with the formalities out of the way, I actually want to get onto the video. Today we're going to be talking about the Elephant Man! So, who was the Elephant Man? Perhaps it's Marvel's unknown character ready to enter the MCU? Or maybe it's DC's sad attempt at replicating Marvel's success. Well, unfortunately, it's neither of those, and the true story is far rougher. But as rough as it is, because of it, it is all the more inspiring. See, the Elephant Man, or as his real name goes, Joseph Merrick, and yes, Joseph, it's not John, one of the several inaccuracies of the movie, was born in 1862. Now, he was a relatively healthy child. But as he grew, unfortunately, deformities started to show. His right limb became just a little contorted, his right leg started to grow faster than his left, growths of skin started to appear on his body, and as he grew, it just got worse and worse and worse. Now, as you can imagine, the childhood of this poor man wasn't great. I mean, as anybody who's been in any school would probably be able to tell you, kids aren't always the nicest, even when you're perfectly proportional, or relatively proportional in your body. It was torture for this poor man, as I'm sure many of you could imagine. But through all the hardships, there was somebody who loved him regardless of what he looked like. And as I'm sure you've already assumed, that person was his mother. Unfortunately, though, his mother often blamed herself for his deformities. Now, it's widely accepted medical knowledge that the emotional state of the mother greatly impacts the development of the child. Now, yeah, it's true that certain stresses on the mother can have some impact on the child, but certainly nowhere near the degree of what happened to poor Joseph. Now, in Joseph's mother's case specifically, what had happened is that a nearby zoo had let an elephant escape, and that elephant had come charging at Joseph's mother, which understandably terrified the poor woman. But again, despite all of his deformities, she continued to love Joseph. But it seemed that fate was determined to make sure Joseph didn't even have a glimmer of hope, as sadly his mom passed away when Joseph had turned 13. His father was quick to remarry, but the woman he remarried did nothing but ridicule poor Joseph. This led to Joseph trying to find a job so that he could earn some money and have some time to escape the constant insults he'd face at his house. He got a job rolling cigars, and that worked for a little while, but unfortunately his deformities just continued to grow throughout his life, so eventually his right hand became so deformed that he couldn't even roll cigars. When that would no longer work, Joseph ended up getting a job as, get this, a door-to-door salesman. Now, I know what you're thinking, and yeah, I can't think of a possibly more unsuited job for Joseph, as hard as I try. I really can't. I can't think of anything that would be more unsuited for the poor guy. But he was determined, and he tried. Unfortunately, it went about as good as you'd expect. People were mean, and they slammed the door on him despite his efforts to be warm and kind. He ended up in a workhouse after that job didn't work, and it was a theoretically good thing. A workhouse, if you don't know what that was, the idea behind it was that people who were in bad situations and couldn't get jobs would go, they'd work, and the government would provide them the bare necessities, a place to sleep, a place to eat, just about everything you'd need just to be relatively comfortable. That was theoretically what it was supposed to be. In reality, that is not what it actually was. What it really was is a place with mediocre, borderline unlivable conditions. It was basically voluntary jail, would probably be the best way to explain the situation. Most people would die here pretty quickly due to the lack of good living conditions. Now that I've properly depressed you, I think we can all agree the majority of us probably would have given up. Except for maybe Uku. Uku's pretty tough, right, Uku? Okay. But the majority of us, yeah, we probably would have given up. But gosh darn it, Joseph was not ready to take this lying down. So what he did is he thought, what can I do? What is it that I can do in my condition? Nobody can hire me. Nobody wants to hire me. Nobody even wants to look at me. What am I going to do? A pretty much unsolvable problem for most of us, but Joseph isn't most of us. Joseph ended up starting his own freak show. I know, right? Like, if you've seen the movie, what you think happened is that some cranky old man found him, and Joseph ended up having to go with him under horrible living conditions because nobody else would take him. But that's not at all what happened. The freak show was entirely Joseph's idea, and he went out, found himself an agent, and got him to get him a couple shows. And even the agent thought, oh, he's too freaky. Nobody's going to want to see him. So what they ended up doing is that he started his first show in this small little theater. But it sold well. It sold really well. And it ended up being the best place possible for him to host his first show, because it was right across one of the hospitals. So a lot of the doctors and medical students would come over to see Joseph's major medical deformities and study them best he can. And that's where he met famous Frederick Treves, who's famous for a couple things, but the one that concerns us right now is that he was the one to do a proper examination of Joseph. And it turns out that, oddly enough, other than his deformities, he was in perfect health. Strong heart, strong muscles, his mind, by all accounts, was okay. Really, the only thing wrong with him was his major deformities. Now, he continued on with his show. Not only was Joseph making 50% of the ticket profits, but on top of that, they were selling the small autobiographical pamphlet that he got the full proceeds from. Excuse the cringy reference, but Joseph was getting the bread. The bread was being gotten by Joseph. I can feel the cringe through the screen. The video's not even posted yet as I'm recording this, but I can feel the cringe energy just coming at me. Uku can feel it too. I mean, man. But that's what he was doing. He was making major profit. Now, you might remember earlier that I said fate was determined to make sure these glimmers of light didn't stay in Joseph's life. And it was not done. Fate continued. See, at the time, this was about when people started to see freak shows less as like this fun thing that you can come and see, and more as just kind of like an atrocity. Now, Joseph did not stop here. He decided, well, people here don't like my show. I'm going to find another agent outside of my country and see if I can get shows there. That did not go well. Now, if you're going by the inaccurate movie, this was about the time Joseph got out of that cage and ran away. But again, very inaccurate movie. What actually happened is it admittedly probably just as bad, though. He got out of the country, he met his agent. It seemed that the rest of the world, or at least the parts of the world that he visited, shared the same feelings as where he came from in terms of how they felt about the freak shows, so nobody came to see his shows. His agent's response was to steal all his money and his belongings and kick him to the street in a place where he couldn't even communicate with the local people. And even if he knew the language of the local people, nobody could understand him because his mouth was so deformed. Now, Joseph was able to sell the very few belongings he had on him for just enough money to make it back home. Unfortunately, though, on his way back home, he had to get on a ferry. And the captain was all like, "No, sorry, man, you're going to scare all of our passengers. We can't let you on." So, unfortunately, Joseph was thrust back into a world where he had no resources, no money, and all people could do is either run away from him or just gawk at him as he trembled there with nowhere else to go. Now, is this perhaps where the Elephant Man story ends? He dies alone, afraid, and cold? No, of course not. Come on, can you believe these guys? How depressing are they? Fortunately, police were able to find him, and the only thing he had on him was Frederick Treves' business card. So they were able to bring him back to the hospital. And he was able to find a room there for a little bit, but there was a problem. See, that specific hospital wasn't really equipped to handle people who needed long-term care. You kind of just went in, and regardless as to whether you came out dead or alive, you were coming out at some point. So, at this point, the movie would tell you that the great Queen came down and decreed that Joseph be allowed to stay at the hospital. As you may have guessed, this isn't at all what happened. But what actually happened was just as capable in restoring your faith in humanity as the movie version was. Frederick sent out a letter saying, hey, we need funding to support poor Joseph, and they got more than enough funding to support Joseph for the rest of his life. And from this point on, all of the higher-ups were just fascinated with Joseph. They came to see him, and he got to mingle with everybody, and everybody who met him said he was the warmest, kindest person they had ever met. Think about that. At this point in his life, Joseph had been dealt nothing but terrible hands. He'd just been ridiculed and hated for his entire life. He had known almost nothing but pure hatred. Yet after all of that pure evilness that had been shown to him, he had nothing but kindness and warmth. Imagine how much conviction and determination you have to have that kind of experience and still be a kind, loving person. Joseph did it. He maintained his warmth and kindness despite all of the obstacles. Now, as sad as it is, Joseph's life did come to a short end. He died at the age of 27. Frederick found him laying on his bed. Dr. Treves theorized that Joseph more or less committed suicide. See, Joseph had this really big head, so he couldn't fall asleep lying down, otherwise he wouldn't be able to breathe. So most of the time, he fell asleep hunched over, which, now that I think about it, probably wasn't the best thing for his contorted spine. But that's how you had to fall asleep. So, when he found him lying down on his bed, Dr. Treves was pretty certain that he'd more or less taken his own life, attempting to fall asleep like a normal person, as he had always dreamed. Although, personally, I tend to subscribe to National Geographic's theory, which is slightly different. Because, you see, they think that Joseph had pretty well-developed muscles to compensate for his deformities. So if Joseph had a hard time breathing, he would have instinctively sat up. But what they think happened is that because of Joseph's contorted spine and massive head, the way that Joseph laid down and twisted his head, it ended up pinching the nerves and blood vessels leading up to the brain. So now, not only is he paralyzed, but on top of that, his brain isn't getting any blood. So he can't move to try to help himself because he's paralyzed and he's suffocating now. And that's what they believe happened, and that's the theory I tend to believe. Now, at this point, you might see a man who had a tragic, rough life. And it definitely was rough. But when I look at this story, I see a man who refused to take life's greatest enemy lying down. That's life itself. It did not matter how hard it hit. It did not matter how many times knocked down. It did not matter if he was beaten to a pulp. He gave back just as good as he got, and then some. As short as his life was, it was one to serve as an example and an inspiration to us of perseverance and sheer determination to get through the evils of this world, because there's always good to be found in it. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and tell me what you think of the new setup. I'm trying a bunch of new stuff out. Tell me what you think. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do I need to fix some things? Do you like it, but this little tiny thing needs to be adjusted? Stuff like that. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, make sure you hit that subscribe button and that bell button. I post every other week, and until then, hear nothing and listen to all. Bye, guys!